Very good evening to you. You're live with GB News. We're going to take you to the White House before we turn to Jacob in Washington, where we can join Donald Trump, President of the United States, participating in a roundtable conversation regarding investment in America. Let's listen in to what's taking place in the White House this evening.
And more. And it's just a part of that. The One Big Beautiful Bill is among the most important pieces of legislation in our country's history. I don't think there's ever been anything bigger, and I think it's going to go down as certainly one of the most important things we'll ever have done. In addition to the largest tax cuts in the history of our country, including the most powerful border security measures ever, it delivers major economic relief to the American workers' families. And there's so many things. Rebuilding our military, we built it just 8 years ago. We started and did a great job, but now we have to rebuild it again. Plus technology change. All of a sudden, it's about drone. You know, we have a new form of warfare. It's drone warfare. So a lot of things change. We did a great job with the military, but now we're going to have to do some little tweaks, to put it mildly. And we'll be doing that, and we have it all nicely funded. I look forward to signing this into law. It's really something that we're having such an opportunity. And I have to say, he's here with us. He's a person that I've admired for a long time. You take a look at what he's done and followed his record. And it's Dell Chairman Michael Dell. He's done such an incredible job. It's as a business person, I study business people, and that's a perfect one to study. It should be almost mandatory reading. So I want to congratulate you on that and thank you for the idea, because you're the first one that really brought this to my attention. I know that you and your friends have been talking about it for a long time, but other presidents didn't get it done, Michael, right? So we got it done. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Sure. I want to also give some recognition to my friend Brad Gerstner, who helped get us all organized and
that's right.
And actually
thank you very much. Good, Brad.
Spearheaded this.
Good. And also we have with us a very powerful man in the world of business, CEO David Solomon of Goldman Sachs. David, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me here.
Long-time friend.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Uber CEO Dara Khosrowshahi. Where is Khosrowshahi?
Right here.
Where? Thank you very much. That's a hell of a name, but you've done a hell of a job, so that's appropriate. And also, again, Chairman Smith for doing such a job. Nobody knows taxes better than Chairman Smith. When we have a problem, Mike, we go to see Chairman Smith, right? So I want to thank you very much, Dara and Chairman Smith. I appreciate it. So I'd like to begin by asking Speaker Johnson to say a few words. And I think then we're going to go to Michael Dell, David Solomon. We're going to go to Dara and then to Chairman Smith. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, thank you so much for your bold, visionary leadership. It is the key to all of this great success that we are achieving. And the One Big Beautiful Bill, it is not an overstatement to say it will be one of the most consequential pieces of legislation.
Well, as you can see there, we've just been listening in to the President Donald Trump speaking at a roundtable conversation inside the White House. We may well return there if he begins speaking again. But let's turn now to all the other top stories with Jacob in Washington, in Westminster, I should say. Fuck.
Well, welcome to State of the Nation, which I'm glad to say is from Blighty rather than from the United States. I regret to inform you that if, like me, you happen to be concerned about the effects of mass migration on the United Kingdom, then you're engaging in terrorist ideology. If you happen to think that Western civilization, specifically values that are unique to our society, such as Christianity, property rights, religious liberty, or freedom of speech, are under threat from the unprecedented levels of mass migration, then yes, according to the Home Office counter-extremism programme, you are indeed an extremist. The programme prevents online guidance, refers to what it calls cultural nationalism, defined as the idea that Western culture is under threat from mass migration and a lack of integration by certain ethnic and cultural groups, as being a right-wing extremist terrorist ideology worthy of a referral to the programme. So, before we deal with this absurd notion, I want to ask, should we be referring the Reverend Starmer, the Prime Minister, to the government's own counter-extremism programme?
We risk becoming an island of strangers. not a nation that walks forward together.
Being concerned about the effects of mass migration on our ancient civilization, as the Prime Minister appears to be in normal life, would be called stating the obvious. But, as ever, the government's counter-extremism service appears to be desperate to find some bogeyman to balance the real fear of Islamist terrorism. Perhaps I should know about this because I was on their list at one point. In 2021, the very same institution was revealed to have included me in a list of red flags that right-wing extremists might listen to as inspiration for terrorist activities. Well, look, let's be frank about this. If you take me as an inspiration, don't commit terrorist activities, I am against them. So for all of you watching now, just know that if you're enjoying this programme, enjoying GB News, enjoying freedom of speech, enjoying the great culture of our wonderful nation, you may be considered an extremist by His Majesty's government. As ever, let me know your views via mailmog@gbnews.com, but I'm now joined by the man who uncovered this story, a friend of the programme, director of the Free Speech Union, Lord Young of Acton, Toby Young. Toby, thank you for coming in. What is it about Prevent that is quite a sensible idea that has led to it being so perverted and failing to deal with its fundamental job, which is to identify the real terrorists?
Yeah, I've been puzzling over this, Jacob, because, as you say, this story that the Free Speech Union broke this weekend is not the first time Prevent has been exposed as casting its net ridiculously widely in pursuit of supposed right-wing extremists. I mean, there was at the same time that a research arm of Prevent identified you as a red flag, it also identified an interest in The Lord of the Rings, 1984, the poems of G.K. Chesterton, being a fan of The Bridge Over the River Kwai, The Great Escape, The Dam Busters, and being a fan of Yes Minister, which would include almost everyone I know. What's at the bottom of this? Well, Robert Conquest famously came up with his second law, which is the best way to understand an organisation and predict how it's going to behave is to assume it's controlled by a cabal of its enemies. And if we broaden that a little bit to understand enemies to mean enemies of Britain and British culture and our history and heritage, then the behaviour of Prevent begins to make sense.
All right, but what's frustrating about this is that this is the same story coming out again. Surely Prevent has learnt from when Sir William Shawcross exposed them for making me a person of concern, that putting democratically elected officials on your list, fussing about the bridge over the River Kwai, makes the whole Prevent programme look ridiculous. When it then fails to keep up its analysis of people like the man who murdered David Amis, it looks worse than politically correct. It seems actually malevolent.
Yes, I mean, it looks as though the architects of Prevent, the intellectual masterminds behind the programme, are much more obsessed with trying to catch extreme right-wing terrorists than they are Islamist extremists. So in the year to date, March 31st, 2023, 11% of the 7,000 or so people referred to Prevent were referred for being Islamist extremists, 19% for being right-wing extremists, where the definition was incredibly broad. People who are fans of yours, for instance. And it seems to me that they don't want to be labelled racist. They don't want to be labelled as having a prejudice in favour of Britain and British culture. So they bend over backwards to avoid, as far as they can, referring people and trying to retrain people who are at genuine risk of being radicalised because they're Islamic extremists. And instead focus everything on perfectly ordinary people with mainstream views.
But is this the sort of end point of the Equality Act, that if you have 11% who are identified as Islamic extremists, you have to have, because you've got to represent the country as a whole, a higher percentage who are right-wing extremists who are probably white men, and that it's the general approach of saying, well, white men are pretty dangerous?
I think they do genuinely think that if in their view a disproportionate number of Muslims are referred to the Prevent programme, disproportionate to their percentage of the population, that will mean they're guilty of racism, of Islamophobia. So they bend over backwards to try and refer non-Muslims to the programme.
But if they had a Prevent programme in 1975, everybody on that list would have been of my religion and Irish, that was where the risk was from. Surely the whole point of this is to focus solely and directly on the problem. It's not in the sense about political correctness at all.
Yes, and according to MI5, the percentage of people they're monitoring because they may be involved in terrorist plots of various kinds, 75% of them are Islamist extremists and 25% are identified as far-right extremists. And yet that percentage is not reflected in the people referred to the Prevent programme.
So what could Prevent do to improve this? Or is it that we're simply being a bit blasé about the far-right terrorist problem, and has Prevent spotted something that the rest of us are just ignoring?
Well, it doesn't look that way, does it? I mean, if you look at the people who actually do commit terrorist atrocities, they're not exclusively, but the majority are Islamist extremists or people who've been radicalised by Islamic extremists like Axel Rudakabana. It looks as though they're getting it wrong because they don't want to be accused of being culturally insensitive or racist or ethnocentric. They're bending over backwards to try and refer white people and retrain white people, white Britons, white working class Britons, at the expense of referring the people who may genuinely be at risk of proper radicalisation.
But do you take some confidence from MI5 saying that it's 75%, 25%, that they're actually devoting their resources to where they ought to be? And would it be better if Prevent actually gave up and gave the money to MI5 to focus on the real problem?
Maybe that is the answer. Maybe MI5, I mean, we know that MI5 itself is prone to being a little bit woke, embraces radical progressive ideology in various forms. But, you know, their practical experience on the ground means they recognise that radical extremist Muslims are 3 times more likely than people on the right to commit terrorist atrocities.
And from the point of view of the Free Speech Union, does Prevent stop free speech? Or do people like us just carry on regardless, saying we like Yes Minister? Or do we feel that there is a risk that we get into trouble if we say those sorts of things?
Well, generally only young people are referred to Prevent. So I don't think we have to worry about being referred to Prevent, although, you know, if the police come around to our house because of some vexatious complaint and find Brexity books on our bookshelves, then we may be marched down to the police station and placed under arrest. I think where it will have a chilling effect is in the classroom. I mean, we know that most teachers are already pretty left-wing, pretty suspicious of people who support Brexit, who might say they want to vote reform or their parents vote reform. And my worry is that increasing numbers of school children with what we would consider mainstream views, who are, you know, genuinely and sincerely concerned about mass uncontrolled immigration, the lack of integration of new arrivals, that they could find themselves referred to Prevent, and that might blight them in their future careers.
Toby, thank you very much indeed. Shortly we'll be looking at the latest evidence that proves the government's incompetence and revealing what the winter fuel U-turn could mean for you.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it? Because the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Well, there's a reason it's called school term, and that is all those little kids should be at school, not elsewhere. Now, I know a lot of people find that difficult to comprehend because they're thinking, well, that doesn't suit me and it's cheaper to go then and whatever it is. But in my whole life, my parents would never have said, take 2 weeks off school or take a week off school.
No.
So I find this very, very hard to... It just shouldn't be part of the equation. You're at school. You're not on holiday.
Well, lots of parents would say, wouldn't they? They can't afford to take their children in
Totally
half term
agree.
because the flights have tripled.
Totally agree, but we couldn't afford it. So what did we do? We went to the local beaches in Ireland. That's what we went. So that's how you had
So
your
you just
holiday.
forego a foreign holiday.
Hold on, so the prices go, but the prices are going up. They make them more expensive
During the
summer holidays.
And the half terms.
So they take them out of school. So you get parents that will take them out of school during school term because the prices are so expensive during summer holidays, which makes it
We're not
unfair.
stupid. We understand that, but the law says you have to be at school.
Right, I agree with that. But don't you think it's disgusting that the price is so much more expensive, and that's the reason people
It's
are
not
considering
really
it?
relevant, is what I'm saying, because the rules say you're not available for these holidays, so you're at school.
Right.
But the companies shouldn't be doing that, should they?
Look...
I don't think they should. I don't think they should be allowed to.
I agree. I think it's
the only
disgusting.
rule that comes first is that is school term. School term means that's what the law requires you to do. Be at school, not be on a beach in Ibiza.
But the temptation is there if it's so much cheaper and you couldn't afford to go during the summer holidays. I've never done that.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees Mogg, and we were discussing Prevent and quite how dangerous all my viewers are. And Cassandra says, the intellects at Prevent, I think the policies and statements coming out of Prevent show anything but intelligence. And John says, let's face it, this country has cancer. There's a 4-year waiting list until it will finally have access to political chemotherapy. We know the likely side effects, but we are desperate for a cure. I wonder, which of Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage are political chemotherapy? Today, the government proved it isn't only mean, but incompetent too. Here was GB News' political editor, the one and only Christopher Hope, with the Chancellor of the Exchequer earlier today.
We had to make difficult decisions last year. The public finances were in a total mess when I became Chancellor last summer, and we had to take immediate action to get control and get a grip of the public finances. We have been able to do that. We've returned stability to the economy. In the first quarter of this year, our economy was the fastest growing in all of the G7, which now means we're able to make different choices. And that's why today I can announce that this winter, 9 million pensioners will now receive the winter fuel payment.
Well, I'm joined now by my most intellectual panel, the former Conservative Cabinet Minister, Sir John Redwood, and the former Labour MP, Lloyd Russell-Moyle. Lloyd, is she very stupid or is she very dishonest?
I think that's fair. I think she made a decision. She panicked when she saw the awful figures that came in.
But the figures are worse now.
And the Treasury officials thought this is a good moment to get rid of a policy that we've never really liked, put it in front of her, get it signed off. And the political reality has now hit that it was deeply unpopular and it was the wrong thing to do, and there were cleverer ways of doing it, and we have reversed. And the best thing to do, of course, when you get something wrong,
of course,
is to reverse.
You're kindly defending the Labour Party this evening, and you've basically said she's both stupid to have gone along with it last year, and she's dishonest now to pretend the finances are that much better because they're actually worse.
Well, I think her ability to step back and look to see where there are other levers that can be pushed is different now, and that wasn't able to be done at the time. But I do think you're right in saying that it was a foolish thing to do so quickly, so early on, without giving yourself time to really look to see where the difficulties in the economy were, which they weren't around the winter fuel allowance.
You may not want to answer, but does she have any credibility with your friends who are still on the Labour backbenches now, or has this been a big dent to it?
Look, I think that there is still a chance for Labour to turn it around for the next election and to win probably with a coalition or reduced majority. But if Rachel continues in post and continues in the vein that she has, that will be completely squandered. And she is the least liked when I door knock on the doors of everyone, and I think backbenchers know that. So either she needs to have a complete change of direction, or I think what's probably more likely before the next election, Keir Starmer will need to look at reshuffling.
And the winter fuel allowance is not a particularly Conservative thing to do. It is a universal benefit that goes to some very rich people. But we didn't scrap it. Was that because we didn't have the political backbone to do it, or because we genuinely thought it was a good benefit?
I think it was more the latter. I think it was political reality. And you don't go round taking things away from people. You want to give them a better life. So why on earth do you go into politics to say, oh, I'm going to stop that benefit to you and I'm going to tax that income you've got? That's not what Conservatives are about.
Because we can't afford it, because the country's running out of money and it needs to focus benefits on people who are really poor without benefits rather than on people who are getting along quite comfortably.
But this is a small bit of money in government terms, although it's an important bit of money if you're on a low pension. And what was so cruel about the Labour decision was to hit those people just above the benefit level who are really finding it difficult in the winter and suddenly taking a bit of money from them that they relied on. And that was why your party and mine had always promised to keep this thing, so we didn't want to have that kind of problem. But there's plenty of low-hanging fruit to go and pluck if you're wanting to get costs down. And in the welfare benefit in particular, the government has recognised that you can't have hundreds of thousands of people of working age taking a lifetime sick note and saying they're never going to work again. You've got to go and talk to them and work away at those who can work should work.
Previous Conservative chancellors have made mistakes of this kind. They have carried out a Treasury policy. The pasty tax comes to mind, the caravan tax, same point.
Which had to be backtracked on.
That's right. George Osborne did a U-turn, but he did it very quickly and survived, and it didn't really make any difference to him. Do you think, concern's probably the wrong word because it's a socialist chancellor, do you think this damages Rachel Reeves' reputation so much that Starmer will have to reshuffle her?
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think it's deeply damaging to her because of the dishonesty that goes alongside it. I mean, the notion that now she's solved a so-called black hole when we all know that the borrowing and the spending is considerably higher than the spending and borrowing she inherited. And the idea that 1 quarter, when you're the top-performing G7 economy, makes all the difference, when, of course, the last 2 quarters of the Conservative government had us as the leading G7 economy. And it was her dreadful budget and all the talk of higher taxes that meant she then had a first half year when we didn't grow.
And isn't this one of the problems, just with politics generally, is this whole spin, and we all do it, we're all guilty of it, but to try to pretend that £1.4 billion was essential to the economy last year or is essential to the economy this year just assumes people are idiotic, and they're not. Our voters are clever, intelligent people who can work out that 1.4 billion out of whatever it is, 1.2 trillion, is a relatively trivial amount.
Well, I think you have to be careful to go down that road completely because a lot of trivial amounts do add up to significant amounts, and you have the we see that all the time. People really do not like waste, and people don't like waste in government, and they get frustrated when it's even much smaller amounts about waste in government. So I think it's fair to say it needs to be looked at, but there are ways that you can do these things that understands politics, that makes people's lives easier. That's fundamentally what it should be. Now, there is some people, I don't know who it is, either in the Treasury or some people in the Labour Party, that love a means test. Now, my view is means test is bureaucratic. You end up wasting more money on doing all the form ticking in the appeal process. Much better to organise a better taxation system and then tax it. And that's what should have happened. It should have been put into the winter fuel allowance and the pension into one payment. It should have been taxed like pensions are already. The very richest would then pay. And if you wanted to, over time, reduce it, you could have then done that in a managed and sensible way rather than this rather gung-ho way. And so I'm very pleased that the Chancellor has U-turned on it, but I do think there needs to be some hard looking at how we got here.
And you see, we are probably ending up with an even worse system because we're now told that 3/4 of pensioners will get it rather than just a few. But we're told that it's going to be split between two pensioners in the same household, and then there'll be all sorts of issues about different income combinations which produce different answers. And we're told that you're going to have a 100% tax rate on that little bit of money that you're given. It is a mess, and I think they're going to find it very difficult to implement.
Well, it's absolutely classic politics, isn't it, that the government makes a mistake, so it reverses by making something extremely complicated. Anyway, thank you to my panel. In a moment, has Reform UK found a way to save you £35 billion of your money? And did John Redwood know about it first?
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GBNews Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello there. It's looking fairly settled across much of the Mediterranean as we go through the next couple of days. Turning increasingly hot, especially for parts of Italy. For Iberia and the Canaries, we could just see a few showers around, but plenty of sunshine around too. But as I mentioned, for much of the central parts of the Med, lots of sunshine around, turning increasingly hot here. For parts of Rome, could see highs reaching the mid-30s as we go through the course of the week. And for much of the Med, really, as you can see, plenty of sunshine around.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GBNews Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's been a damp day across northern parts of the UK and that cloud and rain tends to sink south during the next 24 hours with clearer skies following from the north during Tuesday. But for the time being, there's a lot of cloud in the north with this area of low pressure and these weather fronts moving through. Some heavy bursts of rain for a time during the evening across central and southern Scotland, Northern Ireland and then into parts of northern England and Wales as this weather system moves through. Later in the night, the rain turns more patchy and generally lighter, although a lot of drizzle remains, particularly over western hills and coast because extensive low cloud remains. Some cloud breaks towards the north, where it will be a fresher start to Tuesday for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and a brighter start with some sunshine in places, but it's certainly not going to be bright through southern England, Wales, the Midlands, East Anglia. Extensive low clouds, mist and murk around, and some patchy light rain and drizzle. Come further north into northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, we could see already the skies brightening, the cloud breaking up, sunshine coming through. But for northern Scotland, further showers will be moving briskly through on a northwesterly breeze. Those showers will tend to become fewer and further between into the afternoon. And actually across Scotland, Northern Ireland, much of North Wales, northern and central England will see the skies brightening and the sunshine return. But towards the south, we keep a lot of cloud and some patches of drizzle here and there well into the afternoon. Nevertheless, 23 Celsius there in the southeast, high teens generally elsewhere. But by Wednesday, the cloud has mostly disappeared, although some cloud remains across the south coast and some western parts. Sunshine elsewhere, and with that sunshine and more of a southerly airflow, we're going to see temperatures rise. In fact, what will be most notable is the rising humidity later this week, which could spark some thundery downpours.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
So he can say whatever he wants.
A straight talking show where all voices are heard.
And, you know, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, we were talking about winter fuel, and the Mel Moggs have come zooming in about the great U-turn by the Rachel Reeves Chancellorship. Carl says the economy was in a total mess. Now you have a grip on the economy and you are dragging it deeper and deeper into the eye of Jupiter. Carl explains that the Mariana Trench wasn't deep enough for this analogy. And David says Reeves is a joke. I doubt if she could understand a balance sheet. There is one word she loathes: profit. And that's with an F-I-T rather than a P-H-E-T, just for the record. Has Reform found a way to save the taxpayer £35 billion a year? Well, Reform's Deputy Leader, Richard Tice, has written to the Bank of England Governor, Andrew Bailey, accusing the bank of systematically wasting taxpayers' money via interest payments to commercial banks based on reserves from the quantitative easing process. Mr Tice isn't alone in this view either. 2 former deputy governors have suggested this policy too. I'm joined now by Michael Simmons, the economics editor of The Spectator, as well as my most intellectual panel, John Redwood and Lloyd Russell-Moyle. Michael, thank you very much for coming in. Is this £35 billion a real amount that can be saved?
Well, it sort of, to me, comes down to, it's very complicated, this issue for a start, but it comes down to whether the sort of financial industry, whether the banks would wear it if you were to stop making these payments. Their payments are essentially, you know, their interest for payments or for deposits that the banks put into the Bank of England after the central bank bought bonds from them or gilts through QE, and some would say, you know, they've not done anything to earn on this imaginary money, so why should they have those interest payments? And you know, it's certainly true that if you could just get rid of those interest payments to no effect, then that would be a real saving for the taxpayer. But it's whether if the consequence of doing so had, you know, wider negative effects in the banking industry, then no, there's no real win there.
And the bonds were bought because they were potentially of dubious worth, and the deposits were created because they were the highest grade, and therefore could be used as capital by the banks to continue making loans and to repay their deposits.
Exactly. So this was in a time, obviously, when the credit crunch had happened. Banks were not incentivised to keep lending. So the central bank essentially did this to keep lending going. They also did it at a time where interest rates were historically low. So, you know, the Treasury was actually getting a bit of a windfall from the difference that the bank was making essentially by playing with its balance sheet. But since interest rates have shot up as they have over the past few years, and since quantitative tightening has started, it's no longer a profitable thing to do. And I think that's the basis of Richard Tice's argument.
John, I mean, you've written about this, but not quite this. You've written more about not selling the bonds for quantitative tightening, but holding them to maturity, which would save even more money.
Well, it would save maybe 10 billion a year. The Bank of England is quite on its own amongst world banks in wading into the market and selling long bonds, government bonds, IOUs, that have gone down in price a lot because interest rates are soared because of bank policy. And it's a crazy thing to do. And if they just stopped it, then the Treasury and the taxpayer would be relieved of billions of pounds of losses, because under the deal the Bank of England got, they get reimbursed for every pound of loss they make.
But the government did take the profit on this when things were going in their favour, so isn't it only reasonable that the loss should be reflected as well?
Well, no, I don't agree with that, because you don't have to lose the money by selling the bonds you bought for too high a price at too low a price. That is completely avoidable, and no other central bank is stupid enough to do it.
What can you do instead?
The running profit or loss on the difference between the rate of interest they're paying on the deposit and the rate of interest they're collecting on the bond they own is a big source of loss, and that's a different argument, and I might agree with you on that.
That loss they have to take, but they don't have to sell the bonds, do they? They could hold them to maturity.
Yes.
And with interest rates currently falling, probably their losses on the carry cost would decline as well.
But they reduce over time, because they're only losing a packet on the long bonds, because all these bonds repay at the original issue price. And so the nearer you get to the repayment date, the closer the bond price in the market is going to be to the repayment price, the original issue price. Now, there are 3 sources of losses in the Bank of England. There's a loss on needless selling. There's a loss on the fact that they bought quite a lot of these bonds at a higher price than their value on repayment. And you can't avoid that. No. When you get to repayment, you're going to lose that. And then there's this really big loss that Richard Tice has latched onto, which is that they're losing on the amount of interest they're paying. Now, they can change that, but I would not recommend scrapping all of the interest they pay the commercial banks. I think the ECB has probably got this right. And they pay them a bit less than base rate, whereas we pay them the full base rate. And they say to them, you actually got to keep a bit of money with us to keep credit under control. and you don't get any payment on that. Bank of England didn't used to pay on reserves.
And Lloyd, that's quite a sensible approach. It also encourages the banks to lend, which ought to help boost the economy a bit.
Yes. I mean, I think the bigger problem here is that the Bank of England has independence, which is quite right, but makes then decisions that can, in the long term, suffer for the taxpayer and for the public in terms of the amount of payments that are being made.
But remember, they're not independent on the bonds. They needed Chancellor permission.
Let me wait a second. So what happens is that you have. It's very difficult to hold them to account, and the public are unable to really engage in that discourse very easily. So I think it's quite right to be saying we want to be holding them better to account. We want to hold the Chancellor better to account. We want it to be clearer, that link that you outlined there. But I do think at the moment it's at the moment probably too complicated for most people to really get their heads around.
This independence point is very important because, as John says, they're not independent in this area, but they act as if they are. And if you take the 35 billion on the interest payments and the 10 billion on the quantitative tightening, that is £45 billion a year that the Chancellor doesn't have to spend on decisions made by an unaccountable Governor of the Bank of England. Is this sustainable in democracy?
Well, the democratic sort of question aside, I think quite simply we don't know how the financial markets were to react if the government and the Treasury were to make a more direct intervention. I was speaking to a CEO today of a construction company who wanted infrastructure spending to be given to the Bank of England. Now, I think that's a bit extreme, but it illustrates, I think, a point that the financial markets, businesses, completely just do not trust this Treasury. They didn't trust, I'm sorry to say, the previous Treasury. And the last thing they want is political intervention in a lot of this financial stuff. Now, whether it's democratically right or wrong, I think if we were to change it, we're just risking a horrified reaction in financial markets, borrowing costs going up even further, and then we get even closer to the fiscal crisis that's coming down the road.
All right. Well, in other news, the teleprompter's gone completely, so I don't know what the other news is, but it's come to me, and miraculously. In other news, the spending review will be published this Wednesday, and our very own panellist, John Redwood, has written in today's Telegraph urging the government to target government waste as a means of making savings that could be better spent elsewhere. Well, John, I'll let you have the first word on this.
Well, yes. I mean, when I was in charge of a large quoted company, I had to take some cost out. I did it without any redundancies. I wish I'd had the low-hanging fruit there is in the government. It would be wonderful to go into the government with the power to recommend and to make changes, because we see waste everywhere, from the benefit system, which we already started discussing this evening on your programme, with far too many people getting access to long-term benefits and not enough being done to help people into work, so they will be better off and the taxpayer will be spared money. We've just been going into the losses of part of the nationalised estate in the Bank of England, but there are huge losses now in the semi-nationalised steel industry, in the post office still, in the railways very universally, and that's about better management and not paying people incentive bonuses when they deliver big losses and make a complete mess of their jobs. We see the civil service has grown by 30% over COVID and post-COVID. It should go back to the size it was in the middle of the last decade when it worked perfectly well. And that would be a very big administrative saving. We see the disasters that some of the regulators get up to in areas like the water industry, which could result in very big bills on taxpayers. So there are plenty of areas where you could manage things better and save billions.
Lloyd, do you think a Labour government will do this?
Yes, I think the problem is actually we've had 15, 20 years of people saying we need to be more efficient, we need to cut waste, and in fact the trend has been in the opposite direction. It hasn't been helped by leaving the European Union, and we've then had to do all of our own regulations. It hasn't been helped by COVID, of course, and it hasn't been helped by actually an age of austerity, which what that does is it stops long-term planning, and it means you think, well, what cuts do I need to make in this year's budget because I'm having to make cuts, rather than saying, where do I invest in modernisation and improvement so that I get the longer-term savings? And I think that is somewhere where Labour has been quite good. 80-odd billion pounds is being proposed for the Department for Science and Innovation purely for those things, to look at how they get innovation, they use AI, they transfer...
That's 80 billion
you
of spending.
have to spend to reduce money. If you just go around saying, cut, what you will do is spend more money overall.
That spending, if it's done in the normal way, will be done by UKRI, which is an absolutely useless body. Wastes money like nobody's business.
To get back to productivity levels of 2019, which would be a huge win, you just need to stop recruiting and let the numbers of staff roll off through natural wastage. Why don't they do that?
No, that's not as easy as that, because
I've done it. I know it's pretty easy.
What you've done in the civil service is you've changed it from any long-term thinking delivery to a short-term thinking traumatised service, because it got cut in the immediate wrong places, and you can't make a proposal. If you invest in this, I will have these longer-term savings, because everyone is thinking about what will the next spending review look like, and that is what's caused this overspending in the long run.
Michael, let me bring you in. As an economist, how realistic is it to say governments can cut waste, or is it just the easy answer that politicians give?
Well, on the one hand, I think John is completely right, that there are areas that we definitely can cut more wastage, and everyone in Westminster seems to have a Doge project now to point this out. But in a way, I think they all slightly miss the point, which is, if you look 5-10 years down the line, there's terrifying levels of spending that are not waste, they're just what we've come to expect since COVID of the state, whether that's 100 billion on disability and health benefits in 5 years' time, whether it's the student loan liabilities, etc. And I think we need to have a wider conversation about what size of state we want to have. Forget the efficiency point, and if the majority of the public do want the state to continue at the size it's growing at, then we have to have a serious conversation about how we pay for it, rather than tinkering around the edges.
And some of the biggest savings that the state has made in recent decades: Margaret Thatcher's decision to raise pensions with inflation rather than earnings, Peter Lilly's decision to put the ladies' retirement age up to 65, and the coalition's decision to put the retirement age up further for both men and women. These have saved billions and billions of pounds every year, but there's no suggestion of doing anything like that at the moment, any of the big long-term savings that in 20 years' time make a fundamental difference.
Yeah, well, I think, again, we have a disconnect from politicians and the sort of people who are looking at these numbers every day, because, like, who wants to be a politician that says, I'm going to seriously change the state pension, I'm going to change the triple lock? But, I mean, I was speaking to an academic that works on pensions the other day, and he said he's expecting a future, it might be 50 years off, where the notion of retirement goes away completely because of changing demographics. It may be something we just can't afford.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop there and go to Sam Francis, because we've got something very special. Our special guest, Donald Trump, wants to come back on my programme.
Jacob, thank you. We will be back with you very shortly. But as you say, let's take you live now to the White House. We rejoin the President, Donald Trump, as he is taking questions from reporters there in Washington, D.C. I can tell you in just the last few moments he has been addressing the situation developing in Los Angeles, saying more National Guard troops will be deployed to California. So let's just listen in to what he has to say.
You know, here's the advantage of beautiful weather, maybe the best weather of any state when you think about it. Beautiful weather, beautiful ocean, beautiful everything. You have all the advantages, and he didn't take advantage of that. And he's let people come in by the millions who are overrunning your hospitals, your education system, and your police. Your police are being overrun. Look at what's happened. He should only be happy I sent in the military, because if I didn't send them in, you would have had a problem there, the likes of which we haven't seen in a long time. Yeah, please. Thank you, Brian, very much.
Supersonic flight. On supersonic flight.
Supersonic
yes,
flight.
sir. I know you just signed an executive order on it. Do you want to see a supersonic Air Force One in the next 10 years or so?
Oh, well, I don't care too much about that, but I would like to see, you know, if you think about it, flight, the word flight's an interesting word, but it's probably the only category where we've actually gone backwards, because we used to have the Concorde, and we could fly to London, Brad, very quickly and nicely. And today it takes you 2 times and 3 times as long. It's the only thing where we've regressed. By the way, the Concorde, to my way of thinking, to this day, Michael, because you're very much into aesthetics, I know, but to this day was one of the most beautiful pieces of art I've ever seen. It was a piece of art, the beauty of the Concorde. It was the most beautiful plane, but it was you know, got you there in half the time. Now you spend a lot of time, and there's no reason for it. Because, you know, they have the sonic boom. It's not a huge problem, but they have the sonic boom thing pretty well figured out. The technology changes, the change in the skin, the change in weight, all of the other things. There's no reason why we shouldn't do great. So we are making it possible for them to do supersonic and get us back on the track. I mean, think of it, 30 years ago, we actually had planes that flew much faster than we do now. It took you half the time to get to a location. So we've regressed, and we're going to progress. Okay? Right. It's sort of an amazing thing, isn't it, though? We've gone backwards. On Wall Street, they haven't done that. If Goldman Sachs was like that, you wouldn't have Goldman Sachs anymore. Yeah, please.
Are you planning to deploy Marines in California to address the situation in Los Angeles? Are you going to deploy Marines in California?
We'll see what happens. I mean, I think we have it very well under control. I think it would have been a very bad situation. It was heading in the wrong direction. It's now heading in the right direction. And we hope to have the support of Gavin, because Gavin's the big beneficiary as we straighten out his problems. I mean, his state is a mess. And I'd like to get somebody involved in the rail because, look, personally, it should have never been built because you can fly there for $2. And what are you doing? They're doing that. You could drive. You could do lots of different things. You know, if they did a study, if you gave every passenger the finest limousine service in the history of our world, the most expensive chauffeur-driven, white-glove limousine service back and forth, we would have saved billions of dollars as opposed to building this monstrosity that's going up. And I've never seen anything. You know, I've seen cost overruns. I'm a person, I've always done well on cost overruns. I don't have them. But I will tell you, I have never seen cost overruns. You see them where they're 20% more, 50%, 100% more. These are thousands of percent. Nobody even knows. They have no idea. And it was supposed to be from San Francisco to Los Angeles. Well, they just made it way outside of Los Angeles. Where it's stopping in the middle of, I don't want to say nowhere because I happen to like one of those little cities very much, but it's way short of the destination. And our government is saying, you know, why are we involved in this thing? It's been handled so badly before him, but he really blew it. So, you know, all right, one more question.
Speak to any of the discussions that were had there and the purpose of that retreat, your time at Camp David?
On a what?
Your time at Camp David. Can you speak to what discussions were had there and the purpose of that retreat?
Well, I don't want to speak to discussions. I mean, I told you what we were there for a little bit. We had discussions on many topics. We had a group of people, a large group of people, including generals and admirals and lots of others. And all I can say is our country's in great shape. We're in great shape economically. The bill that Mike and Jason and all the people are working on is going to be, I think, amazing. I think it's going to be one of the most important pieces of legislation we've ever had in this country. It's going to do things that you wouldn't believe. We're going to, you know, I have a very simple phrase. We ran an election on very simple words: make America great again. That's what we're doing. We're making it great. We're making it safe. We're making it beautiful. And we're making it very wealthy again. You know, wealth is okay. You need wealth to take care of lots of other people. We have to make our country better. It has to heal from 4 years of abuse. Our country was abused badly by a very incompetent person and a group of people that weren't incompetent, but they were radical left lunatics. And they ran the country with an auto pen. And I hope that law enforcement's looking at that very seriously. That's like a takeover of our country in a certain way, because this guy had no idea what he was doing. You saw that during the debate. You saw that in other cases. I mean, he had no idea. I saw it years ago. By the way, 40 years ago, he had no. He was bad 40 years ago. We're not just talking about. And they always like to say age, but it's not age. I know people 88, 89, 92. Bernie Marcus, who just passed away, was 95. I spoke to him a year before. He was 100%. It's not age, it's something else. But whatever it is, you can't have that in this country. The damage he's done to this country is unbelievable. But the good news is we've got much of it fixed already, and the rest of it will happen. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Let's go back out this way.
Well, Donald Trump there taking questions from reporters in the White House in Washington, D.C. Interesting question on supersonic flight. You may have heard there something he says, though he doesn't care too much about. But on more serious and significant matters of national security, he has confirmed that there will be a further deployment of National Guard troops to California, he says, if needed. That, of course, after some immigration protests breaking out, shaking the streets of Los Angeles over the weekend. And I can just bring you one line from the Reuters news agency on that. The US military is also set to deploy a further 700 Marines in addition to those National Guard troops already deployed temporarily until, they say, National Guard troops have arrived. So that latest update as well, 700 Marines also to join National Guard troops on the streets of Los Angeles. We'll bring you any more further developments from the White House later tonight. For now, though, let's hand you back to Jacob.
Well, thank you very much to Donald. It was really good of him to drop in today because our down-the-line guest had cancelled. And Donald Trump stood in at the last moment. He's a decent fellow. But my panel are with me to discuss what he's had to say, Lloyd Russell-Moyle and Sir John Redwood. Sir John, 91% reduction in illegal immigrants into the US in April. This is stunning, isn't it? If he can do it, why can't we do it?
Right, that's the question people are going to be asking. And one of the economies we didn't get onto, which people would love this country to make, is blocking all those illegal migrants and reducing the claims, the numbers of people who can claim benefits and subsidised housing because they get entry into this country to do low-paid jobs or to do no jobs at all. And it is a scandal and it's out of control. And America has shown that you don't have to put up with this, even with a very long and very difficult land frontier with Mexico and with Canada. Some people will say he was too tough. But it does show that if you do shock and awe, you don't need to do it for very long, and people get the message and they don't come.
But Keir Starmer can't do this, can he? Because his backbenchers hate it, and he had a very difficult meeting of the PLP where he was beaten up by all the London Labour MPs who loathed his attack on illegal immigration.
No, they loathed the particular way he phrased that in a slightly Enoch Powell tribute act, which I don't think helps any side because it, kind of, if you...
But he can't do it, can he? He can't do a 91% cut in.
If you pretend to be someone else but aren't that person, no one really believes you. Well, the Social Democrats in Denmark have managed to achieve those kinds of numbers without a kind of Donald Trump racist kind of deportation.
They're paying people to go home.
Yes, well, that's...
Would you want a Labour government to do that?
I think that if people are here and their home country becomes safe, we should support them to resettle back. I think that's a very good policy. In fact, I think it's a good policy from an international development point of view because when a country becomes safe, the very thing you want is the brightest and best to go back and help rebuild that country. So I think that from a humanitarian ground, it's like there are a lot of things in this debate that is presented as right-wing and left-wing because of the way that they're wrapped up in rhetoric. But actually, if you get down to the bottom of it, having a processing centre that is not in Britain, that is in France, for example...
Or in Rwanda.
Well, the processing centre in Rwanda was not a British processing centre, it was a Rwandan processing centre where there's in Rwanda, which is a problem because it does say that we never accept anyone. Whereas I think that...
Which I think a lot of British people would like.
They might like that. But Denmark has managed to achieve virtually that. Denmark has managed to achieve virtually that without having a pure Rwanda kind of scheme. And I think that is the positive. And what they've also looked at in Denmark is integration, how we make sure that we put resources into integrating. If you refuse to integrate in Denmark, they have the ability to physically move you.
John, I want quickly to get your view on sending in the National Guard into California. Is this political or is this actually a security thing that Donald Trump has no choice but to do?
Well, it's a partisan thing as it will be presented in the United States of America, but it's not unique. LBJ did it when he wanted to protect groups and sent in the National Guard against the wishes of a governor in a state. It's not without precedent in their constitution, but I think that's very much an American argument.
And Lloyd, on this, does this show that the left are really in favour of open borders, that the governor of California suing the US president for trying to make his state safe?
No, I mean, California is not that unsafe as a state. This rhetoric is silliness. And people are allowed to protest and they're allowed to have civil disobedience. That is a right. And sending in the National Guard is not to protect a group here. It's not that we're protecting a group of Americans in that sense. And the way he's done it is very hostile.
It's to stop riots, but we're going to have to finish. I'm so sorry to cut you off, but I hope you'll both be back next week. Up next is the one and only Patrick Christie's. Patrick, have you got any riots on your programme this evening? Do you need protection by the National Guard?
I mean, firstly, the whole thing's a riot. But yes, we are going to be taking you live to LA, where it is expected to kick off a game. But closer to home, apparently an illegal migrant escaped a deportation flight and went on the run at Heathrow Airport, the UK's busiest airport. We've got footage of that. I'll be playing that for you. Also, Greta Thunberg, the ego warrior, well, her Gaza vanity project came crashing down. And, well, she didn't break the Gaza blockade, but she was offered a sandwich by a nice Israeli man. So we're going to be covering all of that and, of course, Labour's humiliating U-turn, the latest of many. All of that after your weather.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's been a damp day across northern parts of the UK and that cloud and rain tends to sink south during the next 24 hours with clearer skies following from the north during Tuesday. But for the time being, there's a lot of cloud in the north with this area of low pressure and these weather fronts moving through. Some heavy bursts of rain for a time during the evening across central and southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, and then into parts of northern England and Wales as this weather system moves through. Later in the night, the rain turns more patchy and generally lighter, although a lot of drizzle remains, particularly over the western hills and coast because extensive low cloud remains. Some cloud breaks towards the north, where it will be a fresher start to Tuesday for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and a brighter start with some sunshine in places, but it's certainly not going to be bright through southern England, Wales, the Midlands, East Anglia. Extensive low clouds, mist and murk around, and some patchy light rain and drizzle. Come further north into northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, we could see already the skies brightening, the cloud breaking up, sunshine coming through. But for northern Scotland, further showers will be moving briskly through on a northwesterly breeze. Those showers will tend to become fewer and further between into the afternoon, and actually across Scotland, Northern Ireland, much of North Wales, northern and central England will see the skies brightening and the sunshine return. But towards the south, we keep a lot of cloud and some patches of drizzle here and there well into the afternoon. Nevertheless, 23 Celsius there in the southeast, high teens generally elsewhere. But by Wednesday, the cloud has mostly disappeared, although some cloud remains across the south coast and some western parts. Sunshine elsewhere, and with that sunshine and more of a southerly airflow, we're going to see temperatures rise. In fact, what will be most notable is the rising humidity later this week, which could spark some thundery downpours.
A positive outlook through the night will power through to a bright day ahead. Boxed Home Battery Storage, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We're kick-starting summer with your chance to win our biggest cash prize to date, as there's an incredible £54,321 in tax-free cash to be won. What would you spend it on? A brand new car, the holiday of a lifetime, or just sit back, relax,